Hi, welcome back to the channel. I'm Michelle, and today I'm going to be sharing what books I read for the month of May and the first week of June, because a lot of these are due back at the library. I do prefer to get a lot of my books from the library. So before I take them back, I wanted to talk about what I've been reading. And the first couple are more aimed towards kids. I do have some homeschooling resources, some teacher resources, so I really cover a lot of different types of books. So the first ones I'm going to talk about. Now, if I don't have the book, I'll insert a picture. And if I have the book, I'll show you and I'll flip you around and give you an idea of, what it looks like inside the book. So the first couple I'm going to share, I don't physically have the book because they were due at the library in May. So the first one was something we read in homeschooling. It was with our U.S. history curriculum. And I talked about it, I'll link it up above, a little bit in our end of the year family subject review. But we actually listened to the audiobook, and it was Towers Falling, and it was by Jewel Parker Rhodes, and it was about September 11th. So it was a group of kids in school learning about the events of September 11th 15 years after they happened, and kind of how they approached teaching kids. And it was really good. I highly recommend the audiobook. My 11-year-old, I all really enjoyed it. I think it really does a good job talking about the importance of history and even hard history. And history is a collection of stories, and I think when kids can relate to those stories, it's more meaningful, because it's really easy to become numb to history or the events going on in the world, like disasters, horrific accidents, things, wars. It can be easy to become numb to those things, but when you are able to attach people, actual people, especially for children, be able to attach to children in those situations, I think it makes you realize and feel it a lot more deeply, which I think is important in history, because I think we're doomed to repeat it if we can't really acknowledge what happened in the first place. So I really liked it. Next one is for my book club at the library, and it's adults who read kids' books, so usually middle grade, sometimes young adult. But we read the book Alone, and I liked the book. It was written in free verse, so it was a really quick read. I read it in one sitting, and it was about a girl, and an event happens early on in the book, and she's separated from her family, and everybody leaves the town in this emergency, and you're not told what the emergency is until the end and why people left. But she pretty much spends 4 years on her own learning to live by herself. And I liked the book. I think it was well written, but I have to say, when I finished reading it, I didn't like how it made me feel. I think when you're talking about being alone, like despair, that's a very raw human emotion. And I think leaving the book feeling this emptiness, because I'm not one to, I do read a lot of, history and real life things. And maybe that's why I don't really like my fiction to talk about such, dystopian things. I want, hope, not despair. And that could just be a personal preference. That's nothing on the book. I think it was very well written. I think it was very deep for a kid's book, and really talks about that feeling of loneliness, because we are meant to be social creatures, and what happens when you're the only one. So I did wrestle with some of it as an adult, because the main character, I think she goes from 13 to like 16, 17, somewhere in that range. So she has these formative years, she's alone. And as an adult reading the book, I would handle certain situations differently in the book, but to be mindful, I had to remind myself often that this is a child responding to these situations, and they would respond differently. Some of it I don't think is very plausible, but again, that's coming from an adult perspective. But again, I really liked it. I think it was well written. I think it goes deep for a child's book. I just didn't really feel super great after reading it. The next one I do have. Now this was recommended by the Mama Librarian. So I checked it out from my library. Luckily they had it. And it's Visual Stories from Our Dynamic History. And I'll actually turn you around since I have this book so you can see inside. So this is the table of contents, and I really like it's just tidbits of information, but it's also talking about things you necessarily might have not covered in history. Now we do a lot of, we did U.S. history without freedom this last year. We also have done social justice as a core subject for the last 3 years of homeschooling. So we were familiar with a lot of these, but still there are things we hadn't covered in here yet. So I think that it is important to say that it's talking about things we aren't necessarily covering. And I really do like the layout with the pictures. It very much reminded me of something Post-Secret, where people would submit, secrets, and it was collaged and everything. It reminded me of Post-Secret books, but I did highlight some things I really enjoyed about the book. So this one was talking about, this chapter, Traditional Family Values, it was talking about eugenics, which I thought was really interesting because it's something we haven't covered really in history or social justice or any of those subjects in our homeschool. Another section I really liked was, it talks about One Nation Under God, so the influence of religion with the government, which I think is really important to talk about how that has impacted things and be really honest about it. So for example, we learned that private schools were, I previously learned before reading this book that private schools came into existence to enforce segregation because people didn't want to integrate. Another thing I really liked was this Made in America. So it talks about, I was unaware that Niagara Falls was a toxic waste dump, that there was issues with toxic waste being put into the town and people getting really sick, something I never had heard about before. Another thing was Streets Paved with Gold, the American Dream idea, and it specifically talks about MLMs, which I think is really important because I feel like YouTube and Instagram have become the new MLMs, moms selling moms, woman to woman selling, and the impact that's had and really the ethics behind it. So I found this a really interesting read, and like I said, the graphics were really good, so I think this would make a great supplement to history, or even just taking it and diving deeper would be really cool. So next is this. I got this book for Mother's Day. You're the Right Mom for Your Kids, bite-sized pep talks just for you. And there is some religious, influence to it, but it's not overly, you're made to be a mom, and if you're struggling, just pray. I hate books like that. I need more than that. So I did appreciate that it's really, as it says, just little pep talks and getting through your day. And I do like the emphasis in here on taking care of yourself, the importance of you. It's not always about your kids or your husband or all the roles you do, but prioritizing yourself and why that's important. And I think we need more of that as mothers and caregivers. And really remembering who you were outside of kids. And I do like how there's even a gluten-free recipe in here, which I appreciate as we are a gluten-free family because my 7-year-old has celiac disease. So this was uplifting. One of the, when the kids are crazy or loud, read a bite size, feel a little better. So the next ones I'm going to talk about are all homeschooling teacher resources. So this is the first one, Homeschool Teacher, Practical Guide to Inspiring Academic Excellence. I found this on the C website. I was looking and buying different things during one of their sales, and I saw that this was on sale, so I picked it up because I couldn't really see inside it through other resources. So really it's an author, a mom explaining her 12 years of homeschooling her 2 daughters. And again, a lot of homeschooling books I found are really fluffy and really focus on the positive, and she talks about this in the introduction as well, that it's really trying to frame homeschooling in a positive way, but there's more to it than that. It's not just fluffy rainbows and unicorns. Homeschooling can be hard, and you can see here she talks about a bunch of different subjects or topics in homeschooling that I think are really important. So how we learn, so looking at the science behind how we learn, how our children learn, looking at the principles of teaching, what to teach, how to specifically approach reading, writing assignments. I especially appreciated her giving examples and schedules from her own children of what worked. One of the funny things about this book is throughout it, I would write on my bookmark resources she mentioned, and I'm going to show you in a minute because I picked up some of those resources that I thought were really interesting or she referenced. And I think that's really important when you're looking at a homeschooling book. Are they giving you references to what they're talking about or where they're getting the information? Because that's really important. So this is a very practical guide to homeschooling. She, of course, goes over math, history, science, world languages, One thing I think is really important is talking about budgeting and ordering supplies, and she gives a sample budget within her own. And I think that's important because it costs money to homeschool, despite what everybody wants to say. It costs money. So I really did enjoy it. I thought it was helpful, and it definitely hit more that academic that I lean towards in my homeschooling. So I found that really helpful, and not just, dealing with the hard days or just the fast and loose way a lot of people homeschool, especially in the elementary years. I appreciate her talking about middle school years in here and high school years, because that's what I'm getting into now, and I'm getting away from the fluff. One thing I really thought was helpful, she has tables throughout here and references, like I said. This one was an example of math, so using Singapore, Math Mammoth, Beast, Saxon, and it gives you an outline of where you are and how they align, which I found really helpful, because if you watched my previous videos, my 5th grader, my 11-year-old, is doing 4th grade math in dimensions, and how will that set her up for the future when it comes turns to algebra and things like that, because it's really important, especially in the middle school years, to be tracking, because you need to be prepared for things before reaching high school. You can't just drop your kid in freshman year if you choose to homeschool with no plan, no scaffolding. Like, it takes years to get your children ready for independent learning. So yeah, I really did appreciate this book, and like I said, it led to a bunch of other book purchases, but if I was going to recommend a homeschool book, it would be this one, Homeschool Teacher, and A Kitchen Table Homeschool. I think those two sum up homeschooling very well and give you more practical information than a lot of the fluffy homeschool books you see out there. So 3 books that were recommended in that book, and I got these from Thrift Books only because my library didn't have them, so they were only a couple dollars. So it's funny that I talk about these two because they are pretty much opposite approaches. This one is very much, if you put a child in a room with books and give them the opportunity to read books that they want to, they'll naturally become really good readers. And this one is very, direct instruction is important, scaffolding. So I think it's important to read books with different points of view. I don't think focusing on one style or one point of view when teaching is helpful. I think we can all learn from different areas, and it's important not to get hyper-focused in one and pull from different ideas, because that's how you're going to grow as an educator. So I'll go with this one first. I got this one mainly aimed for my younger daughter who struggles with reading. So I'm trying to do more research into that, because I really didn't have to do any of that research with my oldest. She came very naturally to reading, and she would fit one of those kids where, you put her in a room full of books, she excels. But I think you do need a place. There are children that need intervention. It's not just time that they need. So as you can see here, it talks about the reading zones, how to get them into that zone of focus and, the ability to leave and enter this world through your book and experience it. I do appreciate her going through, there's tables in here as well, talking about different books to read, schedules. So again, teacher resources are really important in homeschooling. I really suggest looking into actual teacher resources. In fact, one of the things I noticed is a lot of books I've been getting lately are this. So I looked up the website and I'll link it down below. There's a lot of teacher resource books. So if I'm looking for something with reading or writing, I will look at this website. But like I said, it was helpful. It did give me some really good ideas for my 7-year-old. So for example, organizing her reading area and setting the mood for reading and making it as easy as possible for her to have access to books. And that has made some difference. So I thought this was, and it's not a long read by any means, it was helpful. And you can see, I'm gonna bring this one in again in a minute. Nancy Atwell was the author. This one, With Rigor for All, Meeting Common Core Standards for Reading Literature. And this is grades 6 through 12. So again, I'm doing some more research into middle school and high school, which you're going to see with my next book too. Really preparing myself, educating myself about how best to approach these years with my oldest, especially because she takes to language arts, ELA, very naturally. So really providing, from what I've encountered, especially with middle school, is that it's not, the curriculum isn't really that challenging, at least not for my daughter. So finding things to challenge her is difficult. So I think I'm really gonna have to do some of my own in middle school years and not rely heavily on curriculum that's more aimed towards, mediocre. For advanced, I'm gonna have to bring some other things in. So I'm trying to educate myself the best I can to do that. And this book was really helpful. So you can see here, creating a context for the study of literature. So why read literature? Why do we read depressing books? Developing independent readers, which is essential for middle school and high school years. Comprehending complex literature, which I thought was really good because it's talking how we should avoid just excerpts when analyzing literature, that children have the ability to read things like Beowulf, those harder novels, that if they're given the scaffolding in middle school years, when they hit high school, it's not such a struggle with the language because they're proficient in the language, the vocabulary. They have the skills built in those middle school years to apply in high school, which I thought was really important. So how we redefining what we ask students to do, holding students accountable for their reading, which again, something I think that might be lacking in the homeschool world is accountability for both the student and the educator. Reading, understanding, testing the teacher. So how best to teach in reading and literature, which I think was something I was really looking for, of doing this higher level of learning. How do I assess that, especially when I'm going to have to be doing things like transcripts and grades? How do I assess that? So again, this is something you're going to get from teacher resources, not necessarily homeschooling resources. Teacher resources really give you the rubric and narrow it down for you. And of course, there's a bunch of lists in here about recommended reads. But like I said before, that really teachers aren't there to just guide them, that a really big, important part of education is the direct instruction that teachers provide. So I did find this extremely helpful. Some of it I already knew, but it does give you discussion questions, mapping out areas. It gives you real life situations that have happened. You get a ton of lists like these, which I think are really helpful to pull from as my daughter gets older. And you can see I highlighted it through the entire book. And one of the things I really liked is it pairs classic novels with modern novels. So you can read them at the same time and really be able to analyze them. And it's easier for kids to really understand that classic novel given the more up-to-date interpretation of it. And again, it goes into high school, which is really important. And then, of course, the index is helpful. And then there is a study guide at the end as well as an example. So, again, really great resource. My last one I'm going to share, and again, this was the same author that did The Reading Zone, Nancy Atwell. So I was looking specifically for books for her. And this was her approach to the middle school years, which really, really enjoyed this book. So I'm going to show you the table of contents. So, learning how to teach, chapter 1, really important. Teaching is a part of homeschool. A lot of people outsource and do different things, and that's completely fine, but homeschooling means you're going to be doing some teaching, which means you need to be prepared to do that teaching. So, getting ready. So, one of the things I really like, chapter 3, getting started, is she breaks down her schedule of how she actually does it. So how she does her reading workshop, how she does her writing workshop. And this is someone who's taught for 35 years. And I think that kind of advice and information is really helpful. I think we have YouTube, we have Instagram, we have all these homeschoolers sharing information, which is great. But let's not leave out the 35-year-old veteran teachers who have seen, hundreds of kids every year. They have a lot of helpful, important information as well. So I really like how she kind of walks you through this essential. So she gives you lessons for writers, lessons for readers, and this is kind of the scaffolding I need as an educator to prepare things for my daughter as she gets older. And again, how to assess the work is really important. And then specific genre studies, so poetry, memoir, short fiction. You're going to get a ton of lists in this as well. So I wanted to highlight this. So the appendix, I think, was extremely helpful. So, this one is all quotes to inspire teachers. But then it goes into sample student writing record. And she talks about this throughout the book. Sample reading record, individual proofreading list, editing checklist, which I think this will be really helpful as well. And I like that it's blank so I can make copies. Peer writing conference records, so talking to your students, spelling study form, and then a thesaurus to look up words, editing symbols, and if your child wants to look into actually work being publicated. So again, I love that there's examples throughout the book of actual students' work. Because mind you, my oldest is my oldest. I don't have previous experience with this age level or the expectations of where they should be. So having these samples and that 35-year-old veteran teacher walking you through them is extremely helpful in homeschooling. It makes things so much easier. I know a lot of people worry about, the high school years and teaching it, but honestly, if you do some reading, educate yourself, get that scaffolding in place, it's going to be a really awesome experience. So I would highly recommend this as well. So that is everything I read in May in the first week of June. And you can see it's a lot of prepping myself as an educator for what's coming up in the middle school years, but also when I'm noticing issues or things coming up with my children, I'm seeking out information about that, not necessarily going on a homeschool forum, which, those were helpful too, but really looking into the science behind, is this something cognitively going on, emotionally, mentally? Is it something that's developmentally appropriate? Are they behind? So being able to gauge those things and use these resources, I think, is really helpful. So if you have any questions about anything I showed, let me know in the comments below. If not, thank you for watching.